Hi, my name is Robert Janes, and I'm the lawyer for the Tumuk Treaty Association. I'm here today to talk to you about the agreement in principle that the chiefs and councils are considering and looking at approving sometime in the next few months. We know there's been a lot of discussion in the communities about the agreement in principle and think it's important to get out to as many of you as possible some information about what's in the agreement in principle. In a few weeks' time, we hope that the document will be released and will be publicly available. In the meantime, we hope you can use this video to inform yourself about what's in the agreement. And once the agreement's out, you can use this video to help you read the agreement. So what is an agreement in principle, and what is happening in the next few weeks? The agreement in principle is essentially the next step in the treaty process. It is a non-binding document. It doesn't change anybody's legal rights. It doesn't change the Douglas Treaties. It doesn't change the Indian Act. It doesn't change anything that you have now. But what it does is it signifies to all of the parties that we've reached enough of an agreement that we can move on to the next stage of negotiations. In the agreement, it makes it very clear that there are no legal consequences for any member of any of the Tumuk nations because of signing or approving the agreement in principle. It says that the agreement in principle is not binding. It says the agreement in principle does not change anybody's rights. And it also makes it clear that anything that's been said during negotiations is still confidential and can't be used in court. Even the agreement in principle can't be used in court against any Tumuk nation or against any of you. So then why is it that we're entering into this agreement in principle? Well, there's two main reasons. First, the governments of Canada and British Columbia will only engage in active treaty negotiations with a few First Nations at once. This is just a practical problem. The reality is there are only so many people in the government, only so many people dedicate to treaty negotiations, only so much time to do treaty negotiations. So the government focuses its efforts on those nations that look like they're serious about getting to final agreement and where significant progress has been made and where there seems to be some hope of actually getting to a final agreement. One of the important ways to signify this is by signing an agreement in principle which shows that we've reached agreement on some of the broad principles, even though this may change between final agreement and the agreement in principle. This step is particularly important for some of our nations. As you know, for Songhees and for Beecher Bay, there is a real shortage of land. In order to really put together a land package that will work for these nations, we need to get past agreement in principle so that federal land will come on the table and also so that the governments will allocate the money to be able to buy private land if necessary. As things stand right now, we all know that the land packages for Beecher Bay and Songhees are not acceptable. There really isn't enough land for economic development and there isn't enough land for community expansion. But we don't want to walk away from the treaty table because of that, because it is clear that there is land that is available. It's just a question of the governments taking the initiative to actually get that land available or to buy it from private parties who are willing to sell it. We won't be able to do that unless we get through agreement in principle. The second reason that we need to get through agreement in principle is that for most of the nations, we've signed interim treaty agreements. Those agreements, if you remember, give the nations land that they get to keep whether there's a treaty or not. The first half of the land for most of the nations, except for Beecher Bay, which got all of its land at first, was given in two parts. First, nations got one half of the land on signing the interim treaty agreement, and then when an agreement in principle is approved, the nations will get the second half of the land. For each of the nations, this land is a substantial piece of land with substantial value. And it is important that we get to that stage and get the land for the nations once and for all. So there is a real benefit to the nations for getting through agreement in principle so they get the full benefit of the interim treaty agreement. So how is the agreement in principle approved? When you do get to see the agreement in principle, you'll see that way down at the end of the table of contents, near chapter 26, there's a chapter called Approval of the Agreement in Principle. And this is the chapter that explains how the agreement in principle is approved. This is a relatively simple process. First, it has to be approved by the Government of Canada, then it has to be approved by the British Columbia government, and then it has to be approved by the First Nations governments. And the way that this works is that the negotiators will initial the agreement saying that it's ready to go to the governments. Then it needs to be approved by the federal cabinet, the provincial cabinet, and by the band councils. The band councils decide what kind of process they want to follow for approving the agreement in principle. There is no requirement that there be a referendum. The only time a referendum is required is when you get to a final agreement, when the community's rights can be actually affected. And as I'll explain later, the only way that the community's rights can finally be affected, the only way that a treaty can be approved, is if there is a vote in the communities and the communities approve the agreements. If the communities do not approve the agreements in a vote, there will be no final agreement.